Muy bien, vamos a continuar con los trabajos de esta 26ª Convención Anual de Amdetur. Le pido a nuestros panelistas, al doctor Kemil Rizk, a Howard Nusbaum, a Gurnik y a David Gilbert, que por favor nos acompañen ya al estrado, al presidium, por favor, para que podamos iniciar. Les recuerdo por última vez, quienes requieran de sus audífonos para traducción simultánea, háganlo ahora. El panel va a ser en inglés. Muy bien, continuando con los trabajos de esta convención anual, es un privilegio presentar a ustedes un interesante panel de discusión centrado en el tema de la industria de la propiedad vacacional en el mundo. Este panel será moderado por el doctor Kemil Rizk, director general de Royal Resorts, a quien voy a leer rápidamente una semblanza biográfica. El doctor Rizk ha sido responsable de las actividades estratégicas y de desarrollo de los Royal Resorts, uno de los principales desarrolladores de clubes vacacionales en la zona de Cancún y en la Riviera Maya. A partir del 30 de mayo de este año fue designado director general de dicho grupo. Fue en el pasado director general de Fonatur y durante su administración, como punto relevante, se creó el Centro Turístico Integralmente Planeado de Bahías de Huatulco, en Oaxaca. Para dar comienzo al panel, voy a presentar rápidamente a la gente que lo integra. Está en primer término el señor Gurnik, presidente de RCI. Gracias. Le acompaña también David Gilbert, vicepresidente ejecutivo de Ventas a Desarrollos y Mercadotecnia para las Américas de Internacional. Y también nos acompaña el señor Howard Nusbaum, que es presidente de la American Resort Development Association, la ARDA. Entonces, sin más, damos por iniciado este panel. Por favor, doctor.
Muchas gracias. Vamos a conducir esta sesión en inglés en atención a nuestros distinguidos panelistas el día de hoy y precisamente para poder también mantener la fluidez en las preguntas y respuestas. Bien, el tema de la sesión es la industria la industria del tiempo compartido en el mundo. The theme today is the vacation ownership industry worldwide. So the first thing that we need to know is what is the size of this industry so that we at least get some reference and numbers. There has been recently a study that was not carried out for the last 10 years on the industry worldwide, and I would ask Howard Varda, that is the main responsible person in an institution, ARDA, to carry out this research, to share with us some of the basic numbers of the size of the industry. Howard.
Gracias. Is this on?
Yeah.
All right. It's a pleasure to be here, and I want you to know you're the first group to see these numbers. We're actually releasing it on July 1, so you're going to get a little head start here. And I'm really excited, and to help put this in perspective, this is the first worldwide study of the timeshare industry in a decade and a half. The most recent numbers prior to that were 1996. These are 2010 numbers. The AIF, which is the ARDA International Foundation, and although ARDA may be representative of the U.S. industry, the foundation, which does education and research, is global, as well as GATE, which Amdetur is a member of and was helpful in this research, and I want to thank Amdetur for their support. The numbers are 2010 because we needed to have a baseline that everybody was using the same numbers. Some groups had 2011 numbers and some only had 10, so that's why we used the 2010 numbers. So I'll take a drum roll now. What was the big number the sales for the global industry in 2010, and now remember, 2010 was not a robust year in terms of the World Economic Platform, so I think this number is pretty impressive, and that's $14 billion. That's with a B, $14 billion. Now, who made that up? 5,325 resorts in 120 countries. By the way, I passed out a sheet of a copy of these numbers so you can follow along if you like. Nearly 500,000 actual timeshare units, and the average resort size was just shy of 100 units, about 92 units. Now, this to me was an aha moment. I did not realize this. One always thinks of the resorts in Mexico and the States as being purpose-built. But what about the rest of the world? I thought there were a lot more conversions. And the reality is 71% of the resorts, we're not counting U.S. in here, of the rest of the world are purpose-built, which means they were developed for the idea of timeshare. They're not a hotel conversion, they're not a wholly owned conversion, but they were designed for people taking a week's vacation. And we're going to talk a little bit later as a panel about the product. Now let's talk about the industry health. I told you about $14 billion in sales. That's approximately 750,000 intervals. 774,000 actual intervals were sold, and the average price for those intervals was just north of $18,000. Now that's the timeshare component. As everyone in this room knows, for those of us that have rooms that aren't necessarily being used by an owner or exchanger, that we have rental opportunity. And I think because of the global meltdown in '08, rental became more important as a cost-effective way to introduce timeshare to new consumers. And we're seeing that in the data from 2010, where 15 million room nights were rented at an average rate of $148. And when you add that together, that's another $118 billion in revenue being generated. I'm sorry, that has to be million. Another 108, that's a typo. $118 million being generated. When you add that to the already 14 billion. So, and I think this is another statistic that I like government to hear, and that was our occupancy was 76%. And again, that's 2010. That was a year when people were not traveling as much because of the global meltdown, and yet our occupancy was 76%. So let's compare that or contrast it with the traditional hotel industry, which in the same time period was 50%, or just a little bit north of there. So what does that mean? To a local community, it means having timeshare as part of your resort mix is going to offer a stability for the economic impact and kind of help soften those downturns, whether it's from a hurricane or a geopolitical event or a recession. But the prepaid nature of our product means that that consumer is going to come no matter what's going on. So that is an important message when we're talking to local politicians about why they would want timeshare in their community. And then another, I think, statistic, and this is then I'm going to get off the statistics, is the economic impact. $188 billion in direct and indirect economic impact from the world. I'm talking about around the world. And we employ over 1 million people around the world. So timeshare, even with our small market penetration, is an important player economically, and we're growing. And do you know what this report tells me? It tells me that the best days for the timeshare industry are ahead of us, not behind us. And it makes me very excited to be a part of this industry.
Howard, thank you. The next question I have for the panel is the vacation ownership industry a worldwide industry or is still concentrated in North America? And I would, pass the microphone to any one of you who want to comment about this. I would like to, to get some information from you about what geographical areas are there, what is the relative size of them, which ones are growing, and which ones are just either stagnant or slowly coming out of the recession. Dave, would you start with that, please?
Clearly, it's a worldwide industry. You heard Howard with the 120 countries where there's product currently. but it seems every year we add new destinations. Caribbean countries are coming in that haven't been in historically, countries over in Eastern Europe. So we continue to see the growth of the product on a worldwide basis. As far as the industry growing, the question was, is the industry growing? It's a relative thing. I think every market is recovering, really, and so it's growth relative to where you were in 2008, 2009, and the industry at large is in a recovery mode, but the good news is that the industry, we think, is recovering well.
And I would agree with that. I think we're starting to see the industry really come back around the world. The concentration is still really here in the Americas, but at RCI we have almost 1 million members outside of the Americas, so you really have seen timeshare bloom in many countries and continue to grow. It's seeing a lot of energy in Asia. China continues to grow. Brazil, which is here in Latin America, has a lot of growth. Eastern Europe and the Nordic countries in Europe are where we're seeing a lot of growth in that part of the world.
Well, and the numbers don't lie. In 2010, the U.S. part of the revenue for the timeshare industry was $6.4 billion, and yet for the world it was 14, which tells me that more than 50, probably about 55% of all of the sales in terms of revenue around the world came from outside the U.S.
Something that I found interesting during this economic downturn, which is virtually almost worldwide when you hear what's going on in China, and U.S. and Europe and so forth. As I talk to developers around the world, and I'm not sure if Gordon has the same experience, but the salespeople were saying, we can sell the product. And a real limiter to our industry in markets that offered consumer financing, and some markets don't do that. A lot of developers in this market hold their own paper, which is obviously very lucrative and doesn't hold you hostage to lenders. But in a lot of other markets, the Caribbean and the U.S. and other markets, they need end loan financing to finance their product. All the salespeople were telling me during the Great Recession that, guess what? The consumers will still want to buy the product. We're talking to them, they're positive about it, they like the product, we just don't have enough end loan financing to really absorb the velocity that we can create as sales. And I thought that was a very positive factor, that we didn't really lose the consumer in a lot of markets, we lost the access to capital, was my experience.
Very much the same experience that we saw, and just to reiterate, I think what Howard said about occupancy, one of the great things about this product is it gives occupancy to a location, especially in a mixed-use property like you see so much down here. It's really helped them start to recover on the back end of the recession, and they're actually doing far better than the hotel product that's out there that's really just relying on hospitality.
Thank you. The next question for the panel is the Mexican industry depends heavily on the U.S. consumer. And I would like your comments with respect to where is it right now, the position of the timeshare industry in the States. We have heard that for the first time in 2011 there was growth. It was 2.4%, if I don't remember incorrect. And I would like your perspective of how is that recovering, whether it's still going to take some time, and what are the key issues that are being resolved, or they need to be resolved in order to gain more momentum and growth. Anybody want to start?
I think it is recovering in America, not as quickly as some of the other areas that we talked about, but you're starting to see recovery. I think the larger the developer is out there and the more they have access to securitization, the faster that recovery has been, because the securitization market has come back and come back very quickly. Those that rely on in-loan financing from smaller players or more specialty players are still struggling to find some of that financing and have been growing a little bit slower from that perspective. So I think the larger, more branded players that have securitization access are growing faster. The rest are starting to come back, but they're moving slower.
I would agree with that. It was interesting. The securitization market froze in 2008 in September when Lehman Brothers failed. It was later in 2009 that it was the timeshare industry and the rental car industry that actually broke through that ice. And some of the deals that were done in 2010 and 11 on the securitization market, and that's where you go directly to the street, were better terms than failure of Lehman Brothers. What was slower in returning was the hypothecation lending, where you pledge your notes to the outside lender. And I feel that that turned around in the fourth quarter of 2011. And I don't know how many people in this room were at the ARTA conference in Vegas earlier this year, but the mood was so much better, and it's because the money was flowing again. There were lenders who wouldn't return my calls a year ago who now are calling us saying, how can I get in front of your developers? So I think that the capital crisis is behind us.
Something that I've seen in this recovery that I think people need to take note of is the fact that, yes, it's recovering, and in the States, developers got very creative. I mean, predominantly, it's been a very entrepreneurial business, and these people are very creative people. They're survivors. And so they did things like change the product. They started offering shorter-term product where people could pay cash for it because they didn't have the access to capital. So a lot of developers did that, went into some 3-year offering, 2, 3, 4-year offering where they could augment their cash flow to offset that lack of access to capital. The other thing that people did, and hopefully it's a short-term interim process, is everybody, all of the developers, or most of the developers we talk to, have really gone inward and focused on the existing owner and are selling them more product. We've seen our member ownership interest go up about 0.2% every 2 years that we do a study. And clearly, everybody needs to have new blood, I think, to be long-term successful. The challenge in doing that is now the lenders, because of the issues, have significantly more stringent lending criteria. So probably of any of the areas that you look at, I think the greatest degree of pressure is on the marketing departments to get the new customer in, right? I mean, getting the new customer in has always been a challenge, right, to market and get them in. But now you have to get the right customer in with really the right demographics that can meet the lender criteria in order to sell them the product. So the real challenge, I think, moving forward is the marketing side, because as I said previously, the consumers want to buy it, so the salespeople, not that they have an easy job, but the consumers want to buy it. I think the challenge moving forward is really that marketing side.
I think Dave makes a really good point. Something that, you know, I'm always just wowed by the entrepreneurial nature of our developers. You know, in 2009, they started something called fee for service, where a timeshare developer would work and help manage the assets of maybe a sold out or an unsold condominium situation or other timeshare resorts. That was $137 million in the first year. The second year, it more than doubled to over $300 million, and we're on line for this year, I believe we'll break $500 million. And that is a whole new revenue stream and a way to introduce interesting product to our clubs. So that is, I think, really awesome. The other thing that I think Dave said that I'd like to piggyback on that is very true. During the downturn, the American developers changed the matrix, the unit of measurement of which they value their business, from volume to margin. We went from having somebody put 10% down to 20% down. We started FICO scoring. We got rid of inefficient sales and marketing programs that were very expensive. And so because of that, we may have sold less timeshare to fewer people, but we sold them more profitably to people that were interested in buying it, that had more skin in the game, paid their maintenance fees, and paid for their mortgages. So the profitability and the VPGs were better because of that. Now, the big question is, as we go back and reintroduce this product to people that never owned it before, can we keep that discipline of managing sales and marketing cost? That, I think, will be the determination of whether we're going to be successful over the next couple of years.
Thank you, Howard. The next question, I would like your opinion on how consumers are really looking at the product. We know that this is a product that evolved with the baby boomers. Now we have a couple of new generations have come on after that, the X's, the millenniums. And obviously the product, it is evolving. And I would like to, anybody in comments about whether the new consumers and the future consumers are going to be embracing the product, and if they are going to be embracing the product, what modality of the product do you think will will actually prevail after this. Please, anybody who wants to start?
At RCI, we're definitely seeing Gen Xers and Millenniums start to come into the business. As Howard said, there's not been a lot of first-line sales, but when you look at our member base, about 9% of our member base are actually Gen Xers, and almost 30% of our member base are Millennials. So they're definitely a growing category of ownership type that is out there. When you talk about what I think it affects the product, I think that generation, especially when you talk about Gen Xers, and even somewhat when you're talking about Millennials, are looking for more flexibility than the traditional deeded timeshare week that you would have seen, especially in the United States. And they're looking for different types of use, different types of term products. I think they're just looking for more flexibility, more use than the traditional product was that had started 20 or 30 years ago. It is sort of an internet generation. They have access to a lot of information. They're looking for a lot of transparency. They really want to understand what they buy and give themselves a lot of options.
I would agree with those comments by Gordon, and I would add one or two and say that when we research future buyers, something that we found in the research that was interesting was that singles are a very large interest segment in this product. And if you look back in the not too distant past, resorts would not tour singles. They were a one-legged tour, and why would you tour a one-legged tour? You're not going to make a sale. Well, those kinds of generalizations, you can't grow and prosper, I don't think, in our industry or any industry if you live by generalizations of that nature. And we found, I don't have the exact number, but I think it was in the mid-teens of the people interested were singles. So I think you're seeing that change. Either they stayed with their parents in a condominium, a home away from home, shared ownership product. They stayed with their family or their friends in that product. And so I think we need to broaden the audience that we're talking to and be more open-minded as we market and sell the product. The other thing that we found when we surveyed people interested in the product, this was leisure travelers in the U.S. that we did with Peter Yesowich, was that 56% said they wanted a short-term product. Well, 9/11 and 2008 have changed the psychographics of the U.S. population, which is the largest purchaser, in Mexico and in the Caribbean. 9/11 was quality of life, and 2008 is, owning it and having a maintenance fee for the rest of my life. People, that was a great benefit when you were selling against a right to use, was you get this deeded product and you can pass it on to other generations. I think what's happened now, that paradigm shift, is that consumers say, well, I am stuck with this maintenance fee for the rest of my life. So it translates differently after an economic crisis like we saw. And so markets that can do it, and there's some challenges, tax challenges in the States, but markets that can do it, I think would be well served to have different tiers of ownership where a consumer can buy something that they'll use for a length of time that they think is a reasonable length of time and not have financial obligations moving forward.
Yeah, and I'm going to take Dave's comment there and really try to hone in on what it means to Mexico and be a little bold here. On one hand, I think you guys have really good news in the sense that you are able to create term product and you have great quality product with great beaches, and I think that new generation of timeshare owners is far more diverse, far more attracted to what you have to offer, and because of your legal structures, you're able to offer term product. So that's your asset. I think a liability and something within your control is this is a technology-friendly group that believes in transparency. They don't want to be teased. They want to hear the facts. They don't want to walk through a gauntlet at the airport and be told that they're giving somebody a taxi ride when they're really taking them on a timeshare tour. They don't want to be hearing big price drops. They're going to be looking on their iPhone. They're going to know the truth, and you have to have more transparency. So I think you've got the natural assets to be more successful with this new generation of owners, but I think there's some behavior modification that has to happen if you're going to be able to sell them.
Okay. The next question I have for you is, you touched it briefly, but maybe we could also talk more about our competitive position. Mexico is the after the U.S. is the second largest market, I understand, in vacation ownership. Many of our buyers are U.S. citizens. And how do you see us competing? I mean, do we have, I think Howard touched it briefly, but do we have the kind of product to compete? Is our product overpriced? Is it, adequate to the future consumer? What do we have to change in order to become more competitive? What negatives do we have? It would help us, you touched on some, but I would like the rest of the panel to talk a little bit more about how each of you see Mexico competing within the U.S. mainly, and then worldwide too, please.